I tell you, when we got to New York and I got off that train and I started walking around and I saw black people, free, walking around, men walking around with nice, elegant suits on, with their top hats. And when the women would walk by, they would take the hats off and they would bow. They didn't know these women, but they were so respectable to women. They would take it off and they would bow. And then they'll put their hats back on. The women, they would have on these nice dresses that come out like this, and you couldn't see anything. There was no one. If you didn't have an imagination, you missed everything. I know nowadays, women, they wear everything just so whoosh. I mean, it's almost like they're one of those packets that they put in and they just whoosh, because you can see everything. You don't need imagination, because well, I have you know that a young man, when I was there, he came up to me. And I forget his name, forgive me, but he came up to me. And they said, never trust anyone. Because there were signs all around. Wanted, runaway slaves, $50. Wanted, runaway slaves, $100. Wanted, runaway slaves, $50. And there was a black guy that came up to me and wanted to befriend me. I thought him off because I was scared. I didn't know what he wanted. He said, look, we were waiting on you. Waiting on me? He said, yes. Frederick? I said, yes. He said, come go with me. I'm going to take you to safety. Well, he took me to Mr. Buckles' house. Mr. Buckles was one of the only few black lawyers in the city of New York. And he was part of, look at here, let me tell you something. I love you, but you know what? You need to stay out of my head, okay? Because I will throw some dust on you, all right? But yes, the Underground Railroad. And he took me to Mr. Buckles' house. Mr. Buckles lived in a two-story townhouse. Very nice back then. Yeah. You know, that was what you would call luxury as opposed to what you call luxury today. Well, he allowed me to stay. He fed me and everything. Well, the next morning when I came down, who do you think was sitting in the parlor? The parlor is the living room. Who do you think was sitting there? No.
Your girlfriend.
Mr. Freeman.
Who's my girlfriend? Who's my girlfriend? Anybody remember her name? Anna. He had summons and sent for my what? Anna. There she is on the green board there. Right? There she is. Right? In case you missed her. That's my beautiful Anna. And there's my 4 kids, which really was 5, but my baby girl, she died at the age of 10. Well, anyway, she's sitting down there, and Mr. Buckles had a pastor to come in. The pastor married us. And he says, wait a minute, Frederick. We need to give you a new name. I said, okay. So you know what name he gave me? No, he gave me Johnson. We got any Johnsons in the house this morning? Raise your hand if you're a Johnson. Johnson, going once, going twice? No Johnson. Thank God there's no Johnson, because there's a slave master out there that's waiting for somebody to say Johnson. I'm Johnson. Got him. Well, I took the name Johnson, but I didn't keep that name long because I knew that anybody with the name Johnson, they were always subject to be what? Court. So Mr. Buckles, what he did, he said, look, I need you and the wifey, I need y'all to go to New Bedford, Connecticut, right? Quick as you can. We didn't have any money. So what we did, right, we gave him some of our stuff. Now, in order to get to New Bedford from New York, it was $5. We didn't even have $5. So we wound up getting on that train and going to New Bedford. And when we got to New Bedford, there were some people waiting on us. And would you know the people that were waiting on us? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready?
Okay.
She better, you better tell me or somebody going to jail. She's like Denzel Washington. You want to go home or you want to go to jail? All right? Train today. But anyway, all right? The name was Mr. Johnson. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. They opened up their door and they let us in. They fed us. And I'll never forget the day we were sitting at the kitchen table. We were sitting at the kitchen table. And guess what? He said, Frederick, what's your job? What can you do? I said, well, I'm a ship carpenter. He said, oh, you can go down to the docks and you get a job anywhere, right? And Anna, she says, Fred, we're going to have to get home, somewhere to stay. We can't stay here. So Mr. Johnson said, oh, I know the perfect place for you, right? But he said, before you leave, because I had backed away from the table, getting ready to leave, he said, Frederick, before you leave, how about we look at your name? My name? I said, yeah. How about we look at your name? He says, I was looking at this play, Lady of the Lake. And there was a gentleman in the play. His name was Douglass. I said, that sounds interesting. So I asked him, how does he spell his name? D-O-U-G-L-A-S. I said, okay, I'll take it, but I want 2 S. I want to add another S. So when you say my name, you have to say it with pride. Douglass. Say it again, everybody. Douglass. You got to let that S ride. Douglass. You see what I'm saying? Like a snake. No, not Master Corvée, but Douglass. So you have to recognize that I'm in the building. Well, I went on and I got a job and whatnot. And when I was out, I just finished. I was just finishing cleaning the chimney. And this black guy came up to me, Mr. Lassiter. He came up to me, right? And he had a stack. He had a stack of papers, right? And he said, oh, you're new to town. I said, yes. He said, what's your name? I said, Frederick. He said, Frederick. Well, look, I have here, all right, some papers here, all right? And he said, I'm not interested in those papers. He said, it's the Liberator. You should get a copy. They're 10 cents a copy. I said, I don't have any money. I can't afford that. He said, that's okay. I'll give it to you for free. I said, I don't want your charity. Well, the Liberator, if you may know, all right, that was who I would begin and who I would befriend and who would become my mentor, William Lord Garrison. So Mr. Lassiter, he invited me to one of the meetings. I really didn't want to go because my main thing was working so that I could take care of my becoming family. Well, I told Anna one day, I said, Anna, I'm going to go to the meeting. So when I got to the meeting, I set off, not to be noticed, okay? Next thing I know, Mr. Lassiter, he saw me. And he said, Frederick, while I'm sitting there, he said, come go with me. I want to introduce you to Mr. Garrison. Me? He said, yeah. So I goes up and I go to speak to Mr. Garrison. Mr. Garrison said, Frederick Douglass. I said, yes, sir. Sir, he had already heard about it. Not alone, to my unbeknownst, he had already wrote a story about it. And he showed me in the paper. I was like, that's me. So he said, Frederick, I want you to get up to the podium and I want you to say something. Sir, I don't have a formal education. He said, I know you don't have a formal education, but you can speak. We know you can read. So we need you to go up and speak. I said, sir, I do not have what you have. Mr. Garrison said, what do I have? You have education from an educational institution. I said, the only education I got is a PhD. He said, what? A PhD? I said, yeah, it's written all over my back. He said, oh, I'm sorry. And I even took my shirt off to show him all my grades to get that PhD. Well, eventually I went up and I stood at the podium, nervous. I was about 23 years old at the time. I was nervous and I was shaking. But I managed to come out my mouth and say, and all the white people were maybe about 2 or 3 blacks. And I come out and I says, Mr. Garrison, I just want to say that I thank you, sir, and I have great respect. So Mr. Garrison, he's sitting there staring at me, and he's going like this, telling me to talk to the people, not to him. So I managed to gather up the strength. And when I gathered up the strength, I began to speak loud. And I said, I just want to let you know that yes, slavery is real. I want to let you know that there are slaves, black people in the South, who are getting whipped, who are getting treated like dogs and animals. And when it was all said and done, would you believe that all these white folks just stood to their feet and they just started clapping immensely? And Mr. Garrison came up next to me and he shouted out to the crowd. He said, did you just get finished listening to an animal? And the crowd said, no! Did you just get finished listening to a slave? No! The next thing I know, Mr. Garrison wanted to hire me to go on a speaking tour. 6 months. Yeah. And he was going to pay me. Now, I said it earlier, 25, but this is where the $25 came in. Yes, I got ahead of myself. And he started paying me $25 for each speech. And not only that, would you know that Anna had the nerve to start talking to Mr. Garrison and say, Mr. Garrison, take Frederick. He's a good speaker. And I'm standing there with Mr. Garrison standing there. I'm like, Anna, please, I can't leave you. Yeah, I'm working for you. She said, Frederick, don't worry about us. You're doing a good job with us. You're a good man. You're a good father. But go, because the world needs to hear what you have to say. And from then on, sir, I took off with Mr. Garrison. And we went on that 6-month tour. And next thing I know, 1845 came about, and I had wrote my first book, The Narrative and Life of Frederick Douglass. And a friend of mine who was there with me on the tour, his name is Wendell Phillips. Since you pointed over here. I showed him the book while we was in the room by ourselves. I said, this is what I wrote. Yeah, I told on all my masters and everything. And what you know, Mr. Phillips, you know what he did? He took the book from me. And he said, Frederick, what you need to do, you need to take this book and you need to throw it in the fire. And you need to burn it. Because if people know that you told on everybody, they'll be hanging you from the rafters. And I told him, I guess I'm going to have to take that chance. But I made sure that book went out. And I sold that book for 50 cents a copy. And one Saturday, I always talk about the Saturdays, the wifey and I and the kids, we having what? Breakfast. And all of a sudden, somebody burst through the door. Who was it? Mr. Garrison. He said, Frederick, you got to leave. You don't talk on your masters and everybody. You got to leave now. I said, no, I can't leave because I have what? A speaking engagement. You see, forget about that speaking engagement. Get out of here. And Anna sitting there holding the maid. She said, Frederick, go. Well, I made my first trip to Canada. And then I went to New England. And I have, you know, when I got over to New England, I loved it because they treated me like a man. So much so that one day I was sitting there having something to eat and a dog came up to me. Yeah, the dog came up to me and he started clawing on my arm, on my leg. And he climbed up a little bit and he looked me in my eyes. He said, oh. Well, believe it or not, the dog was telling me, welcome, I love you. So I said, wow, even a dog loved me as a black man. I was getting that love. Well, I stayed over there for 2 years. And when I was over there, I was at a gathering. While I was at the gathering, may I ask, anybody here ever been to a high society ball or gathering? Raise your hand if you haven't. I've been to a few of them, yeah. You know, everybody's, you know, they dressed up and I guess they got neck braces on because they can't move their neck. You know, they move their whole body around, you know. And when they sit down, you know what I mean? Matter of fact, they don't even sit down because they don't want the suit to wrinkle. Well, I'm there, and I have a nice glass of wine in my hand. You know, I'm being sophisticated, all right? So, Miss Stack, she comes up to me, and she says, Frederick, I just want to let you know that we sent $750 to your master, you are. And since we sent the $750 to your master, you are free. We bought your freedom. Well, I'm in this sophisticated atmosphere, so when they told me that, I didn't say anything. So I had that sophisticated drink. Free. And she said, Frederick, come back to earth. I'm like, oh. So then she said, you can bring your whole family over. You don't have to go back. You can come here to live. What we'll do, we'll give you a home. We'll send your children to school. We'll set you up very well. Well, I said, that sounds great. Thank you. But I think I'd best to be getting back home. It took me 4 weeks in the midst of the cold to get back home. And I will let you know that while I was on the ship, right, I wanted to speak. But there were some, I guess, enemy guys on the ship. They beat me. And I had said, when I had that battle with Master Corvette, that I would never bow down to no one. We fought. And when we fought, I wound up, they broke my wrist on my left. Because you know I need that right. When I got back to America, and I came in by way, secretly, I came back not only because I was free, but I mentioned earlier about my baby girl Anna, who had died. I came back to see her off. Well, again, we were living in Rochester, New York. And while we was in Rochester, New York, just for the sake of time, it is believed that the KKK blew up my home on 1st Street in Rochester, New York. And when they blew it up, I have you know, because when I got back, I started my newspaper, the Frederick Douglass Weekly, the North Star. And even Mr. Garrison and I, we began not to see eye to eye, because Mr. Garrison had the belief that the Constitution was against freeing slaves. I believed that, and I knew that. But my point was, sir, to alert him that even though the Constitution was about keeping slavery, we wanted to use the Constitution against them to free the slaves. So, Mr. Garrison and I, we parted ways. We were no longer friends. However, life went on. And when it went on, guess what? This is when I started my activism. And you know what I did, sir? I took it upon myself to travel to Washington, D.C., to the White House. And when I got to the White House, I'll never forget this moment. We were all in the hallway because you had to go up this stairwell to get to the Oval Office. I was the only black man standing there. And as I went up, I was maybe about 3 steps from the top. I could hear all the white guys down there calling me the N-word, who this N think he is, blah, blah, blah. But this young lady, white young lady who worked there, you know what she did, sir? You know what she did? Say what? You know what she did? Say what? There you go. That's right. Frederick Douglass. She said, come, Frederick. Well, I took an invitation and I went into the Oval Office. Who was in the Oval Office? The President, President Abraham Lincoln. Ladies and gentlemen, in case you didn't notice, President Abraham Lincoln stood 6 feet 4 inches. I stood 6 feet. Some say 6'2", but I was 6 feet, 200 pounds. Okay? Well, when I went in, Mr. Lincoln, he got up from behind his desk, which would seem like it was a mile long, and he came around and he shook my hand. And I looked up at him, and I said, greetings, Mr. President. And he said, Mr. Douglass, thank you for coming. Listen, I'm joyed to have you in my office. And then he said, I heard you've been saying some bad things about me. I said, sir, may I have a seat? He said, sure, have a seat. Now, ladies and gentlemen, since we have young people in the house today, you know, and no pun intended, our young, especially the young fellas, when they sit down, they have a habit of sitting down, you know, or they like, you know, or they grabbing themselves and whatever. Well, I didn't sit down like that, so I just to let you know. I sat down with dignity, such as, Mr. President. And he says, how can I help you today, Mr. Douglass? I say, Mr. President, I come first of all to say thank you for allowing this visit. But sir, I do have some things on my mind that I need to talk with you about. And those things are really, it's 3. It's about the freedom of my people. It's also about the black male having the opportunity to serve in the Civil War. Sir, I let you know that though we are engaged in the Civil War, we cannot fight in this war with one hand behind our back. Meaning that you have many black men who are just eager to get into the war to help us win. And if you have them and allow them to get in the war, I guarantee you will have 2 hands instead of 1 hand tied behind the back. And my other concern, sir, is the women of this country. Women's suffrage. I am eager to find and make it so that women of this country will have the freedom, no matter the race, no matter their culture, but women will be able to be free. Ladies and gentlemen, that began what is known today as the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Though the 15th Amendment did not pass until after my death, but those were the 3 main amendments that I was really concerned about. And from there, I I stood up, I shook Mr. Lincoln's hand, and I went outside the White House. Unlike today, you cannot walk right into the White House. There's barricades, and matter of fact, they just constructed another barricade because of the abortion rights that's about to be announced. Well, when I stood outside that White House, I stood just like this. And I felt like a big man. Yes, I did. Why did I feel like a big man? Because I was the first black man to enter into the White House. I was the first black man openly free to walk into that White House and sit in the Oval Office and have a meaningful conversation with the President of these United States of America. So please, ladies and gentlemen, I know you all are saying that, Mr. Douglass, you are not the first black man in the White House. Well, I'll have you know I can test that because your Barack Obama was not the first black man. Give me a high five. Well, I made it on back to Rochester, New York, and when I got back to Rochester, New York, it would be a little bit, maybe about 6 months before the word would come. And I have you know, on this night, we were all gathered at the church in Rochester. We were at the church waiting on the word. And out of nowhere, ma'am, a horse came up. It was not Paul Revere, but a horse came up. It was not the horseless man, but it was a horse with a man on it. And when that man jumped off the horse, and he came inside the church where we were gathered, and he unraveled that document, and he began to read, "On this day of January 1, the year of my Lord, 1863, it is documented that all blacks in this country are forever free. Signed by the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln." And I have you know, he raveled it back up, and he left it on the table, and he left, never to be seen. But we praise God all night long. And I'll have you know, besides, well, not even Mark Twain, but I was the #1 person, black person in this country to have the most photographs taken of me. And each of these photographs, you never saw two things. You never saw me smiling, nor you ever saw me crying. But I will have you know, upon the word of us being free, I broke down and I started crying. Because we were family free in this country. And I mentioned earlier when I first started that Juneteenth, we were free, but there was a segment of the country, Texas and a few others, that had not gotten the word of freedom, and that brought on what we know as Juneteenth. And just to wrap up, before I wrap up, allow me to give you this. After that, in that January 1st announcement of freedom, a few years later, I would become the first president of the Freedmen National Bank. Not only would I become the first president of the Freedmen National Bank, and I will admit, regrettably, it failed. However, that was an appointment for me to brag about. Later on, in 1884, I believe it was, I got one nomination for President of these United States. In 1859, I believe it was, I got one vote for Vice President of these United States. In 1874, somewhere around there, no, 1889, 1891, I was commissioned to go to Haiti, all right? And I stayed in Haiti for 2 years working with the government. I quit. They did not fire me, and the reason I quit because their government and I was on 2 separate sheets of paper. So I quit and came back home. I also became the first Marshal of Washington, D.C. And I will share with you, in the midst of me being the Marshal, I made a visit. I made a visit, ma'am, to Master Hugh Ard. When I went to Master Hugh Ard's home, sir, Master Hugh Ard was gravely ill, laying in the bed. I sat next to him while he was in the bed. And you know, he addressed me as Marshal. Yeah, Marshal Douglass. I said, sir, please, don't address me as Marshal Douglass. Address me as you did back in the days. You called me Fred, so call me Fred. And Master Ard said, no, that's not respectable. Well, Master, I'm still calling you Master. he finally broke down and he called me Freddie. We had a nice long conversation, and in our conversation, he apologized to me. Yes, he said, sir, I apologize. I did not want you all to be enslaved. So I apologize at this moment. 2 weeks after that visit, Master Hugh R. was deceased. My Anna, after 40 years, my Anna, she would die. 2 years later, I would wind up remarried. A lot of people don't know this, but I did remarry, and the young lady that I married, she was 20 years my junior. Her name, well, before I get to her name, she was my secretary. Her father, Gillian, him and I, we worked closely over the years. Her name, Helen Pitts. Helen Pitts was also white. My daughter, Rosetta, she is the first young lady on the picture of 4. She was very upset. She even came out of her mouth and she told me straight up. She said, Pa, how could you marry that hussy? Everybody's going to turn against you. Everybody's going to hate you. And I told her, I said, Rosetta, do you love me? She said, I don't know now. But he says, I do have the right to marry who I wish. Well, they denounced her. Helen Pitt's family crossed her off. Well, guess what Frederick and Helen did? Helen went on they went on a 2-year trip. Matter of fact, he tripped back to New England. He tripped back to Ireland. He tripped back to some of the places that he had ventured to when he was younger. Though a lot of the people that were there when he was younger had passed on, but he went back and there were the children of the people that were still there and they recognized him. Well, my day was coming. On February 20th, 1895, I was at the Washington Convention Center. I had went there with my good friend, and some of you all might have my good friend probably in your pocketbook, probably at home, stored away somewhere. But my good friend was no other than Susan B. Anthony. How many of you all have some Susan B. Anthony's in your person? Yes, I do too. Okay? Well, Susan B., she helped me off the stagecoach. And by this time, I had a cane. So, and the cane that I had received, just to let you know, it came from Mr. Lincoln's wife, Mary. They had a tribute to Mr. Lincoln in Lincoln Park in Washington, D.C. I was standing in the crowd. And somebody noticed me. There was a lawyer up there that was boring the whole crowd. So they noticed me out there. They said, Frederick, speak! And I told the person next to me, they don't want me to speak because I don't have any nice words for that man. Even though I appreciate what he did. But I wound up going up and speaking. And I said, I just want to let you know that Abraham Lincoln was not a friend of my people. We were, at the least, we were stepchildren to Mr. Lincoln. Also, I will come out to say that I have great respect for Mr. Lincoln. He won me over. To me, Mr. Lincoln was the greatest president. Not because he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but because he had unique care for this country. And as I ended up and I began to walk off the stage, his wife, his widow, Miss Mary, she broke her neck to get up to the stage. As I was coming down, she hugged me and she gave me Mr. Lincoln's cane. You can see Mr. Lincoln's cane at my home in Cedar Hill in Anacostia. They called me the lion. Yeah, because I had long hair. They called me the sage because I had the long hair and the long beard, as you may see in my pictures. However, on this day, February 20th, Miss Susan B. Anthony helped me to get out the cart at the Washington Convention Center. It was a women's suffrage meeting. I went up to the stage, and she helped me to the podium. I spoke for maybe about 5 minutes. At this time, I'm 77 years old. At this time, it's 1895. So after I spoke, she helped me get back in the carriage. And I made my way home. Ma'am, I was going home to get a bite to eat because I was on my way to another meeting. Well, when I got home, and I will tell you this, long ago I was told by Mr. Garrison, Don't bring humor when you're out and about. You keep that at your house. If you want to joke and play, you keep it at your house, Frederick. They don't need to see that side of you. So each time I left the house, I was a very serious man. As a matter of fact, I will say that I had 21 grandchildren. 21 grandchildren. And when we were home, if I wasn't out engaged in speaking and whatnot, quite naturally, I'm playing with my grandchildren. Well, this particular day, the girls, they would get in my hair since I have long hair, and they would braid up my hair, and they would have these little bonnets in my hair. Well, one day we had company come over, and they said, "Frederick, you got company." And it was the city council from Washington, D.C. coming over for a meeting. So I get up and I go to the door. I got all this in my hair, and the children, they go, "Look at Papa, look at Papa." Well, you know what I did? I slammed the door and went back, "Get this out of my hair." I was a very witty, fun guy at the house. But once I opened up that front door and got on the outside of that front door, I became a very serious man. Never let them see you smiling. Never let them see you weak. Stand strong at all times. Well, like I said, when I got back home, Helen, she was in the kitchen with a guest. They were sipping on tea. So I walked in and she said, "Frederick, are you hungry?" I said, "No, I'm just going to go upstairs and rest for a little bit because I do have another engagement." Well, as I began to make it up the stairwell with my cane, I stumbled. And she said, "Frederick, stop playing around," because she knew I was a very witty guy. So she said, "Frederick, stop playing around." So I regained my composure, and I took the next step. And when I took the next step, that's when the heart attack came. They had noticed that while I was at the meeting, some of them noticed that I was sitting there, and as I was sitting there, I was going like this to my head, you know, but they couldn't figure out what it was. Yeah, none of us was sitting there. So that was the beginning of something drastic on its way. Well, when I fell down the stairwell, and I'm about to go into submission, Helen came and she picked my head up and she had me in her hand. And she said, "Frederick, Frederick, hold on, Frederick, hold on." And as she noticed my breath was starting to leave me even greater, she put my head down on the floor and she went to the front door and she started screaming and hollering, "Help! Help! Help!" Now keep in mind, this is 1895. This is not 2022 when you pick up the phone, right? Okay? Well, by the time somebody came, I was on my last breath. And I had expired. I expired about 5:52 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And they came by, they gathered my body up quite naturally. We went through the procedures. And I became the first black man to lay in state at the Capitol. And if I could step out of character for a minute, when the great notable